Now, the British Army has issued an apology to a female soldier after she received racist and sexist abuse.
She's Kerry-Ann Wright, and she actually fronted the recruitment campaign for the army. She said she experienced years of racial slurs, including references to lynching her.
Well, as a result, she's accepted a settlement from the Ministry of Defence.
And a profuse apology from them too. Let's talk now to the former head of counterterrorism at the MOD, Major General Chip Chapman, who joins us now. This is a really shocking story, isn't it?
It is, Anne. It's not unfamiliar, though, unfortunately, in defence at the moment. Under the last Conservative government, we had both the Wigston report into inappropriate behaviours, and we had the Atherton report, Sarah Atherton, the MP, into the sexual harassment of women. So you can make as many recommendations as you want, and the Wigston report made 36, but unfortunately culture still eats policy recommendations for breakfast, and there still is a culture which is really a sort of white male-dominated culture with a view that it's only males who should be in the army, not females, and it's that sets the context for this. What's also disturbing is that she was at AFC Harrogate, the Army Foundation College, which is where you send your best instructors to be the guardians for those 16-year-olds coming into the army. And the fact that this behaviour could take place there is also shocking in the extreme. And we failed her in terms of the chain of command, and that's why she had to go to an employment tribunal and why we've got this settlement out of place. It's easy to say something must change. All those reports have said something must change, but the cultural aspect is still something which is very difficult to get to grips with in the armed forces.
Why is it difficult to get to grips with?
Well, about 87% of the armed forces are still male, and they still have this belief that it is a male environment and that combat and the army is just for males. That is, of course, nonsense when you're potentially excluding 50% of the workplace. Indeed, 60,000 people are, for example, serving in the Ukrainian armed forces at the moment. I'm sure they have no problems with this because the cultural aspect is different when you're probably fighting a war. There still is this sort of working class mentality. People are not living up to the values and standards that the army and the armed forces set, which does include appropriate behaviour. And this is not about equality legislation. This is about what is appropriate behaviour. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that all the things that happen to her do not fall into any rubric of appropriate behaviour.
No, I mean, forgive me, but working class mentality seems like a bit of a loaded phrase, Chip.
Well, it might be, but that's where we have a lot of the recruitment comes from, and those environments are often very misogynistic and paternalistic. There's still that sort of attitude in lots of the army. I'm not trying to denigrate the working class at all. The whole thing about this is that when soldiers are great, they're brilliant, and when they're bad, they're awful. And we see that also across society as well.
I mean, just in case anyone listening or watching thinks she might be a bit of a snowflake, I mean, clearly the MOD and the Army absolutely agreed, ultimately, with her that her life had been made hell. She grew up in Nottingham. She enlisted at the age of 20. She went into the Royal Artillery, posted out to Germany, and she said there she had to serve alongside soldiers who praised Hitler and said that they supported far-right groups, including the Ku Klux Klan, the English Defence League and Britain First. They shouted racially offensive slurs when she walked in the room. They said things that were clearly racially appalling. One point, she was braiding her hair because they were doing a swimming exercise, and somebody turned to her. In fact, it was an instructor who turned to her and said, you know, we're not in the ghetto here, you know, as though that was a racial slur. She said they were going to make my life a living hell. They told me they were going to, and they did. And she couldn't believe she'd been the poster girl for recruiting more people of colour into the army. Not only is that ironic, but it's absolutely cruel that nobody believed her when she made repeated protests to her superiors.
Well, that's exactly the point of what I said about she was failed by the leadership. Leadership is really about solving problems. And the day soldiers stop bringing you their problems is the day you stop leading them. And that's why she had to go to an employment tribunal, and that's why she's been failed. All the things you said there, and of course, fall into the inappropriate behaviours rubric, which is those that not only breach laws, but norms of behaviour and core values and standards. which include sexual offences, bullying, harassment, and discrimination. All those things you said are in that bucket. That's nothing to do with being snowflakes. That's being a decent human being.
Absolutely. But in these groups where soldiers behave like this, they must have somebody who's one step up, one rank up, a superior of some sort, who is looking at them. There must be witnesses to this, but clearly there was an acceptance of that sort of behaviour.
That's right, and that's also a failure. The standards you walk past are the standards you accept. None of that is appropriate, and the chain of command failed. That is exactly why she had to go to the employment tribunal. Not only was she failed by chain of command, that's the vertical cohesion, which has been not dishonoured. She failed in a peer group.
Will there be any repercussions to this? I mean, is somebody going to take some action over this?
Well, that's the point that I mentioned earlier on. The action has already been taken in terms of two significant reports in the last 5 years, the Wigston report and the Atherton report. And of course, it's easy to deal with the consequences of this. You can, jail the people who are the perpetrators of this or take disciplinary action against them. That is not the cultural thing, which in any change program is the most difficult thing to deal with.
OK. Chip, good to see you. Thanks very much indeed. Well, we've had a response from the MOD who said, "We do not tolerate abuse, bullying or discrimination of any kind and encourage any personnel who believe they've experienced or witnessed unacceptable behaviour to report it. All allegations of unacceptable behaviour are taken extremely seriously and thoroughly investigated. If proven, swift action will be taken." The MOD settled this claim with Kerry-Ann Knight in June with no admission of liability.
Yes, in the end, before they actually gave a ruling on it, that she agreed to settle. But I don't think statements like that are good enough. It's like saying we'll set up a report, or like I said earlier about the riots, a politician standing up and saying this has no place in our society. Yeah, it's true, but not good enough, is it?
But the problem is it doesn't apply across the board. That's the thing. I mean, I've spent a lot of time on barracks over the last few years, and that's not what I've seen with female soldiers, with black soldiers. With there's always a bit of banter, but there's been nothing like this.
But she protested. She took it to her superiors time and again, and nothing happened. And in the end, it was only when she started to record it that they had to sit up and take notice.
Oh, well, that's the failure. Because you're not going to change any... If there is an underlying culture in some places which is not acceptable, you don't change it until the bosses start hauling people into the office.
Yeah, but you see, that statement said we take allegations like this very, very seriously. Well, duh, because they didn't for her.
No.